Hello, welcome all, and it's time for your monthly dose of Film Crack Crack. And thank God you don't have to just listen to me and Nick for a change. We have another voice to
Mhm.
add to the mix, which is always a pleasure. It is, of course, Mr. Geno Cuddy. Hello, Geno. How's it going?
Howdy, partner. It's doing. I'm doing pretty well tonight. How are you guys?
Yeah, good. The better for seeing you. And I think
Mhm.
maybe is it possible for you to stand and show us that t-shirt in all its glory? Because that's quite the shirt.
Yes, this is a. Let me see if I can tilt my camera up.
There you go.
This is a T-shirt that I sell on my T Public page for my television program, which is Sunset Cuddy Six Gun Theater, a television program that airs here in Connecticut on local public access, but I also stream it live to YouTube as well. And basically, what it is I discuss and show old B westerns from the silent era through the 1950s. So this is one of the T-shirts I sell of me holding a film print. That's actually a film print of the Sunset Carson film Santa Fe Saddlemates. Uh, a print that I actually wound up having to return due to it going vinegar.
Oh,
Um, so yeah, this is basically me holding a film print in my hand. So,
so Gino, how many episodes are you up to now with Six Gun Theater?
well, I've done, I think, about 26 now.
Wow,
Yeah, I did a season one and a season two, and each season is about 13 episodes. So I think if I'm doing my math right, it's about 26.
that's incredible. I mean, that's yeah, totally awesome. And it's funny because obviously you used to host more of like a discussion-based show, right? So like comparing the two, which has been more enjoyable, or are they equally fun to do?
Six Gun Theater is probably the best product I've ever put out. I mean, Geno in the evening was fun, but it could be a headache at times. And Sunset Cuddy Six Gun Theater is probably my favorite of the two because of overall enjoyment of it and the process of it and just getting this stuff out there and being able to, show these old films and talk about these people again when a lot of them haven't been discussed in many, many years. And I've actually gotten feedback from not the producers, the access coordinators at my studio, and they've said that it's probably the most unique thing that they have on their schedule. So there's that.
Nice.
Yeah.
hmm And
So
then
I'm sorry to interrupt there. Having not watched all of them, but I've definitely watched quite a few of them, and this is one of those things you can say. You don't want to say before, but you can say it after it's improved. Um, you've loosened up somewhat in the second season, which I think is good. Uh,
Good.
the
Thank you.
intros were a little more they were a little more stiff in the first batch, but you can tell you've kind of relaxed somewhat, so the delivery is a lot smoother and more it just overall it just exudes a bit more confidence with what you're doing there.
And could you believe that I did all 13 episodes of the second season all in one day?
Wow.
that impressive.
Yeah.
That was been a long day.
Pretty much, yeah. But we managed to get it done, because I was confident. I was like, I was doing well that day, which is rare for me, but I was doing pretty well that day, and I was like, yeah, let's just keep pumping them out until either I get so tired and fatigued that I can't, or
Mhm.
if the studio doesn't, or if I go beyond studio time.
Mhm.
No, people should know the last episode isn't like a Monty Python style crook coming from off screen and yanking you off
No.
by the neck.
Um,
No, 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 no.
and then, Gino, I've also seen like just from following your Facebook feed that you're potentially, are you doing some like you're doing some like showings of some of these films now, like
Yeah.
not on TV, but like live or whatever, like in a cinema kind of a setting.
Yes. Actually, on Friday, November 8th, of this year, 2024, at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I'm going to be showing two rarely seen silent westerns, both actually having some involvement from the fellow that we're going to be discussing tonight, and and those two films were sourced from elements at the Library of Congress, and I'm currently working on arranging to acquire the services of an organist to
Mm.
hopefully either I think we're gonna have him play an electric piano and accompany the films that ways. Because we're going to be doing it at my church's first church on 190 Court Street in Middletown. We're going to be having it done in the memorial room in our church with a good projection screen and everything else. And it should be a lot of fun. I mean, one of the films was actually newly transferred uh, from the Library of Congress specifically for this presentation. So and also I'm also going to show it on my television program. So that should be a lot of fun. Seeing these films in person on a big screen, hopefully with a good audience and with live musical accompaniment.
Will they be DCP prints?
DCP, I'm not familiar with
Yeah,
that.
what? So I also don't know what that is. What
I'm
is
sorry,
that?
they'll be digital as opposed to from actual film reels.
Right,
Right,
they'll be digital.
right, right. It's interesting as well. That brings it. So you were saying about there's one that's restored, and therefore you'll be able to show it on your show because um, I'm guessing the three films that we're gonna talk about today, they would probably be excluded maybe from being broadcast on Six Gun Theatre because they don't exist in format which is broadcastable, really. They're a little rough, right? To say the least.
Yeah, I mean the one of the films that we're going to be talking about more than the others,
Mm.
I'd have to say. Um, I mean, I think the Kit Carson film that we're going to be discussing is watchable in good quality, and but yeah, there definitely is one of the films that we're going to be talking about, and I wish to apologize to both of you for having to sit through that in such a poor quality, but that's really the only copy that I think is out there, so that's all that I could find for that. But that was really rough going. But then again, I look at Clive and he has to deal with Pashto language cinema where he doesn't know the language, and the film
Hmm.
prints have been played in the sewers of
Yep.
Pakistan, and they have like massive VCD logos across the screen. So
Yeah, oh yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
imagine this was too much of a struggle for
No,
you.
no, no.
No, God,
It,
no. For
it,
me, it's funny, Clive. It seems churlish of you even to complain, given what like
uh,
my so someone.
I was slightly annoyed there wasn't a break in the middle for a 10-minute commercial for sitar lessons or anything like that. But I
I'm
powered through.
I'm thinking of some of those really small, like 240 megabyte file VCD rips that are like so grainy that you basically like. To me, these were much easier to watch than even some of the Hopping Vampire films that we did for our that other project we're working on. So no, I have to say for me, I was like, no, it was all pretty easy going.
Well, you get well. That's the thing, isn't it? If you're a true film lover, you deal with what you've got,
Yeah,
right? There's
exactly.
no point wishing for something that doesn't exist. So yes, we're going to be talking a triple bill here, and there's something that connects the three. So why don't you introduce the theme here, Gino? Who's the big head honcho guy behind all these three films?
The guy who's behind all three films in various roles of either writing, producing, directing, or all three is a man by the name of Robert J. Horner. And Robert J. Horner is a rather unique personality in the realm of B-Westerns and B-Western filmmaking, in that at the age of 7 years old, Mr. Horner was playing with his brother on some train tracks, and the train came, and Mr. Horner wound up losing both of his legs. So from the rest of it, for the rest of his life, he had to get around by a motorized scooter, almost like what we would now think of like the old hover-round commercials. And I guess he also had a special card that he put together to get around in. And so he was a legless filmmaker of action-laden B-westerns in the silent era and the early sound era. And he was kind of a con artist around town. He would draw ads in local trade papers, and he would say, "Hey, would you like to be in a movie? Help fund the production, and you could have a role in the film." And once the aspiring actor or actress signed their life away to this man, he would take the money and shut them out of the production a lot of the time.
I do wonder if the villain of the 70s film, The Amazing Mr. No Legs, was maybe partially inspired by the legend of Bob Horner.
Could be. I mean, good old Bob Horner has been called the Ed Wood of B-Western filmmaking. And whether that moniker is apt is to your own eye. But it's interesting. I'm currently attending community college here in Middletown, and I'm actually planning, and this will change probably if I wind up changing my mind when it comes time to do so, but I'm actually planning on writing as my final essay in my English class, an essay on Robert J. Horner. So that ought to be interesting. But yeah,
sorry, just to interrupt there. I have to admit that, like, anytime I hear the moniker, the Ed Wood of anything, always kind of raises my shackles a little bit anyway. I kind of get it that it's a shorthand, but even Ed Wood wasn't the Ed Wood of, what he was far from. I always think he was far from the worst filmmaker. I think people who think Ed Wood was the worst filmmaker of time clearly haven't seen enough truly awful films, right?
Agreed.
Oh, I agree. I mean, at least Ed Wood had some artistic aspirations, and he cared about the quality of film he was putting out. I mean, it's unfortunate that he didn't really have the backing that he did, or that he could have had. But it's, hey, you're right. It is a shorthand, and it's primarily used by people who love Mystery Science Theater 3000 and have gotten their film history from that drivel. And
take that, Nick.
I know a bit of a mea culpa there, but yes, but I do agree with you. I've said this many times that there's so many A Hollywood films that I would never watch again, and there are so many B and C and D level films that I will gladly watch 100 more times. So to me, budget and whether or not everything is always perfectly in sync, or whether or not that's far less important to me than heart and soul and somebody who really cares, right?
Plus as well, like, the thing is, within 5 minutes of watching a film scripted by Edward D. Wood Jr., it's an Ed Wood film. Like,
yes,
it has a tone, it has a turn of phrase, it has just a way about it. No one.
Yeah, it wasn't focus group.
Like,
it wasn't focus group. There was no committee. It wasn't. Yeah, no. It's very much. You're right. The man was an auteur.
His focus group would have extended to just, what do you think, Criswell? I predict this shall be the biggest hit of the season. That'll be about it.
So Clive, with you saying that, do you think that Robert J. Horner carries a similar weight to his productions?
Well, So just to put this into context, me and Gino have spoken about Robert Horner before, right? But we were speaking of his talkies, whereas we're going to be talking about his silence today. And I think the one big takeaway, I suppose, just to get ahead of it a little bit, I took was his films certainly seem less awful without sound.
Yes. Yes. I
Okay.
feel that way too.
Yeah, so I'm not.
And there's a reason for that. There's a
Hmm.
reason for that too, which I'll bring up. Because I've always, since discovering Robert J. Horner, I've always sort of maligned him a little bit as well. But I was given an education by my friend Ed Holst, who's a Western film historian, and he told me that the reason that Robert J. Horner's talkies were as bad as they were is that there was a per reel tax from the state of California on sound films, plus there was also the cost of shooting films with sound and the sound equipment and all that. And so for shoestring producers like Robert J. Horner and his contemporary Victor Adamson, aka Denver Dixon, it was pretty rough going for these guys, and that's why a lot of them wound up getting out of the business. Like Robert J. Horner's last films came out in like 1935, and that was pretty much it for him because he probably couldn't stand anymore these restrictions and these fees and all this that was basically bankrupting him.
Hmm.
About how many films did he make? I mean, whether they survive or not, do you have a rough estimate or guesstimate?
Can I just tell you off now, Nick, for using the phrase guesstimate? Carry on.
Sorry, I'm thinking because I honestly know nothing. I know you can, but I honestly know nothing about Mr.
You'll be saying dramedy next, and
I will be saying dramedy, yes.
yeah.
But no, like, are we talking like dozens of films? Are we talking hundreds of films? Like that. I'm trying to get a sense of the his output, maybe.
Well, I think it might be upwards, like maybe I would like to say 80 as a
Okay.
ballpark figure, but there's probably even more out there. And then there was a film of his that was called Racketeer Roundup from the talkie period, which that film itself is lost, but somebody wound up taking that film and filming new footage of a horse called Black King and filming a few minutes of footage with Black King, the horse. And they wound up splicing in footage from Racketeer Roundup, and they reissued it as a film called Gunners and Guns, which does exist.
Okay.
So probably think like early Godfrey Ho type of filmmaking.
Right.
So
That's
Less ninjas, more cowboys. Oh, the other connection as well, I suppose, because another person who kind of was involved in this practice as well, and you mentioned him, and just in case people out there don't know, Denver Dixon, Vic Adamson, were of course Al Adamson's father, right? And yeah,
I did not know this. I didn't know Al Azwu was from a multi-generational like B movie
yeah,
family.
he was an Australian, I believe, Vic Adamson, and he was involved in the motion picture industry there, and then came to Hollywood like a proper cowboy, more or less. And yeah, Al Adamson had a few runs at doing westerns, right? A few times, like even some of his non-westerns are like The Female Bunch is pretty much a western. Satan Sadist is kind of a western on motorcycles, right? So yeah, he was very much steeped in the western. Yeah. So
So is the Walloping Kid is up first? Unless Gino, is there anything else you want to add about Horner before we get into the specific films?
Well, Horner, he wound up passing away in, I believe, 1942 of cirrhosis of the liver. But I don't think that there's much left to add about Horner, but he is quite a legendary figure, probably for all the wrong reasons in the realm of B westerns and B western filmmaking. If you would actually like to read more about Mr. Horner, I highly insist you going to b-westerns.com and searching for Robert J. Horner, because there's a lot there. I mean, there's even been some confusion as to when he died, because there was another person in Hollywood with the name of Robert J. Horner, who was an actor and a playwright, who died in a car accident with actor Jackie Coogan in 1935. And they're not the same person. And also, when you look up Robert J. Horner, you get a lot of furniture, because there, I guess, was a Robert J. Horner furniture manufacturer or store. But just look for Robert J. Horner in a connection with B Westerns, and you'll be sure to find them. So.
Yeah, there's a good write-up there. Also, another fascinating coincidence, now that you mentioned it, the some people believed he died in a car accident. Also, some people believed that Ed Wood also died in a car accident with a stunt man or something who'd gone berserk and drove into a telegraph pole. For a while, people thought that's how Ed Wood died as well, but
I assume he also probably cirrhosis.
True.
I would imagine, or something
Well,
related to lifelong.
His liver wasn't best pleased with him, let's put it that way. But
yeah, I'm gonna say
yes.
the,
No,
I do feel like the film industry. I mean, there's certain jobs that I think just kind of chew people up and grind them up. Strangely enough, I think comic artists have a really high, and like professional wrestlers, there's certain jobs that just seem to have a really high mortality rate where people don't seem to live long lives. Comic writers all seem to live long lives, and the artists seem to like burn out very early. I think it's just the workload of just producing and producing on such tight deadlines that I just don't think the human brain and body can do it.
Thankfully, YouTubers live forever, I've heard. So
let's hope so.
Yeah, so we're all right. Yeah, no, definitely the life of Robert J. Horner would make for a fascinating biopic if someone, you know, could scrape together. You'd need a budget, to be sure, because you're dealing in period detail and stuff, and it's important to get that stuff right. But yeah, no, I that would be a fantastic showcase for someone who would want to take on the role. It would make
the legless legend of Robert J. Horner.
Yes, and they could steal it. They could steal the title of the Amazing Mr. No Legs as well, because I think the copyright might have run out on that one.
Yeah.
Is Gary Sinise still doing much acting? I'm thinking he's done this in Forrest Gump. He played a character with lost his legs, right?
Well, I was thinking in this day and age, you'd actually probably hire someone who didn't have any legs.
That would be nice, but I don't know if does Hollywood actually do that much.
Well, this would be the opportunity, wouldn't it, to forward someone who could actually do it, rather than hire some A-list director and then spend a fucking fortune like CGI their legs. Yeah.
Actually, it's funny. Just before we even start about this, I made a note at one point during one of the movies where somebody fired off a gun, and I thought to myself, even in silent like B movies, that looks more convincing to me than the vast majority of gun muzzle flash that is now done digitally. Like every time I see it in a movie, and I'm like, that's video game. That's not real. They didn't even have a blank. They didn't even shoot a blank there. They just somebody held up a plastic gun, and then somebody did like a little splotch of.
Yeah, well, you're going to see more of that as well now, right? Because since the Alec Baldwin case,
of course,
even blanks are now considered like an unnecessary risk, right? Okay. So yeah, you're going to see more of that going forward. And there's
it pushes me right out of the movie every time I see that. I'm just like, I can't believe the gunplay.
I was given it can be quite perilous. I was given a pellet gun on a job I did for NHK one time, which I was supposed to be waving around or whatever, and it was just a pellet gun, but they assured me it was, there was nothing in it, and I was just kind of checking it out, and it went off, and there was a pellet in it, and it just flew by my fellow co-actor's cheek, and she felt it. I was just like, she was suddenly, woof, and it just grazed her. And if that thing had gone in her eye, she would be blind.
Wow. This is, and do you remember who you were playing, just out of interest sake, or what the role was where you were waving a gun around?
I was a robber who, yes, in fact, I think I was the first and only male on the all-female Learn to Speak English show, and for some reason I was robbing a bank or something. I can't remember.
Okay.
So what do we need to know about the Walloping Kid then, Geno? This is 1927?
I believe it's 1925 or 26.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The Walloping Kid is an interesting film for a variety of reasons, but the main reason is because of the lead actor in it. The film The Walloping Kid was part of a series of 6 films that the Poverty Row Studio A1 Film Corporation released. And the series was, I believe, called the Rocky Mountain Knockabouts. And there are I think there are only about 2 films of the 6 that survived. There's this one, and then there's a film called Ridin' Wild, which was preserved by the Library of Congress. And I believe that film was preserved because it preserved a lot of early footage of Tucson, Arizona. So a lot of these old westerns, there's like footage of areas, that have long since been redeveloped and such. So that's another fascinating reason why I watched them. But The Walloping Kid is basically about a boxer who gives up his pugilistic lifestyle and comes to be a cowhand on a ranch. Meanwhile, there's some dirty dealings on the ranch. There's some cattle rustling and other things going on, and also there's an impoverished girl and her father who need the help of the titular Walloping Kid, played by Kit Carson. And I'll get into Mr. Carson in a little while here. So there's also this detective that's investigating the goings on at the ranch, and the Walloping Kid, who I believe is named Jack Hampton in the picture. He winds up assuming the role of a murderous outlaw in order to protect himself on the ranch, and he winds up getting back into the ring to earn some money so he could give it to the girl and her father who need it desperately. And yeah, that's basically what the film is about.
There is actually quite a lot of contrived kind of stuff going on for a 65-minute picture, right? There's a lot of stuff going on. I have to admit as well, I do quite like the title, The Walloping Kid.
Yep, agreed.
I like the sound of that.
And there's a few things I like. I quite like when he first affects the disguise of the outlaw, right? Because I think in the movie he's actually the son of the owner of this ranch, but then but this ranch is being handled by other people, right? So his dad has sent him out there to kind of get the lay of the land, and he ends up doing this whole thing where he fakes being an outlaw, but his whole swagger when he puts on the hat and is quite enjoyable. And the other thing I really liked was whoever those boxers were, they looked like rough guys. In that scene in the middle of the film where they show up, you're like, that they don't look like actors. They just look like scarily tough, rangy looking dudes with beat up faces. I was quite impressed by how.
But you can tell, though, oddly enough, so you can tell they're not. I don't think they are boxers because the in the ring scenes they demonstrate fight choreography in the days before Yakima Canutt and John Wayne kind of invented modern American fight choreography, right? Because they do that thing where they just throw like haymakers like into each other's shoulders or the side of the head, right? There's nothing particularly intricate about the choreography, but oddly enough, it's
Oh,
so
it totally
frenetic.
works.
Yeah,
It
and
totally works.
with the camera slightly undercranked, it's like, oh, it's like a couple of whirlwinds going at each other. So it kind of works anyway.
I really liked that the boxing match. The public kind of won in the square or whatever in the middle of the film. Yeah, and as I said, yeah, it worked for me. I thought it was, yeah, well, exactly what you just said. Like it just seemed like lots of energy, lots of kind of madness.
And Kit Carson does have yeah, and I've seen some of his films, but he definitely has an on-screen charisma, which maybe even comes through more. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, this is the DVD cover from Alpha Video. This is the copy that I sent to Clive and Nick. This is a recent release. This is a 2023 DVD, and it also comes with a bonus film, Battling Travers with Dick Hatton from, I believe, 1925, Western short. So
Says at the top there as well, it's got the Lost Transfers of the West. Is that a ongoing series?
yeah, Lost Treasures of the West is
Or treasures, sorry, I said transfers. Lost Treasures of the West, yeah.
Yeah, Alpha puts out a lot of silent films and a lot of silent westerns, and a lot of people, comment on the quality of them and say that, oh, Alpha Video quality, but I got to give them credit because they're the only people that are putting stuff like this out. Because you're never gonna see like Kino Lorber put out a Blu-ray 2K restoration of the Walloping Kid. You're never gonna see that. So it's like it's up to outfits like Alpha Video and the like to save these films from obscurity, and I'm glad that they do that. I mean, they're the source of they're the source of all three films that we're going to be discussing tonight. So you got to give them a tip of the hat for that. So I actually want to get into the story of Kit Carson because he's actually a rather interesting fellow, and he appears in another film that we're going to discuss tonight. Kit Carson is not the American frontiersman, but a fellow by the name of Elia Bullock. And Elia Bullock went by a multitude of names. He went by, of course, his birth name, Elia Bullock. He went by the name of Boris Bullock in films. He went by the name of Kit Carson in the series of 6 that he made for Horner. And most curiously enough, by the end of his life and by the 1930s, he's going by the name of William Barrymore, which of course alludes to the famous Barrymore acting dynasty, even though Mr. Bullock bore no relation to that famous family. And how he arrived to films is interesting, and I hope you don't mind, Clive, but I actually want to. Let me see if I even still have it up here. I want to take a little bit of a time here to read a passage from his son Dick Barrymore's book called Breaking Even. I found this on the Internet Archive, and this was a fascinating read. And this shows you just what type of guys they were getting for these films. So it's a little lengthy, but I think it's worth it.
Go for it.
Okay. When Elia Bullock opened his eyes, he saw dead bodies and dirt. He was one of 8 white Russian soldiers in a 10-foot deep pit that had been carved out of the frozen Siberian earth. He was the only one still alive. It was dusk or dawn, depending on how long he had been unconscious. He could see an overcast sky straight up out of the vertical dirt walls that made up the 15 by 13 foot-hole that served as his cell. A communist soldier was looking down at him. The man in the pit was my father, Elia Bullock. He was an 18-year-old Russian Cossack serving in the Tsar's army. After graduating from a prestigious military academy at the age of 17, he had been assigned to the Siberian border guards as a cavalry officer. It had taken more than a year for the revolution to find its way into Siberia, but when it arrived, the communist troops had shown little mercy on the infamous Cossacks who had been known to ride through villages with flashing sabers, keeping law and order for the now overthrown Tsar Nicholas II. Ilya had been making his escape toward China, hoping to reach the White Russian settlement of Harbin, when his horse was shot out from under him. Riding a white horse across a friendly plowed field was a mistake, but he had little time to select his escape route. The Bolsheviks had a cavalry officer on the run, and their pursuit had been relentless. His guess was that he was in for some interrogation about the numbers and whereabouts of his fellow border guards, and then a quick death by firing squad. Ilya had no intention of waiting around to be questioned. He looked closely at the dirt walls for a route which would enable him to climb out of the pit. Perhaps he could use his belt buckle to scratch out a foothold. He could not hear any talking coming from above and assumed that the guard was alone. He had been sitting in the pit for an hour when a missile splashed into the mud beside him. It was a half-empty can of beef stew that the guard had tossed down as Ilya's last meal. A kind gesture that would cost the guard his life. The idea to cut the guard's throat with the jagged edge of the half-open lid came when Ilya cut his finger trying to scrape out the last of the stew. It was after midnight when he began piling up the dead bodies of his cellmates. There was no need to carve out footholds in the walls or try to hoist himself out by using roots. Ilya made a stairway of fallen soldiers, walked up, slit the guard's throat with the beef stew can, and hightailed it to China.
Wow. Now there's a film.
Wow, that's a tough guy movie actor. That's insane. First of all, he was a Cossack. I mean, I
Yeah.
guess the horseback riding obviously was something he worked out long before he got to the Hollywood West. That's wild.
But when you see this guy, or better yet, this guy right here, could you literally see this guy being like that?
Yeah, it doesn't scream Cossack.
No.
Also, the story about, giving a last meal and then it's used to slit someone's throat just backs up the old no good deed goes unpunished.
That's totally wild.
Wow.
It's funny. It's because actually, when I was watching this, I made a note that, like, from certain angles or in certain parts, he reminded me a bit of Richard E. Grant. He's rangy. He's kind of got the black hair that occasionally kind of hangs down. So yeah, really not seeing him as a kind of guy who would be I don't know what, James Bond, two-fisted,
But he definitely does have on-screen charisma. You can see, and clearly, he lived like by the time he got to, Hollywood, at the fringes of Hollywood, as it might be, working for Bob Horner, like, must have just been a fucking breeze compared to crawling out of trenches and slitting people's throats. Like, big deal, And he does exude that sort of life lived kind of charisma, I think.
The guy who plays the corrupt foreman as well of the ranch is also quite good. Like, he's quite scary, and he's got a great comb over that at one point when he gets in some fisticuffs kind of all comes on. Because I'm working on my own, you could see there, trying to, cover up the increasingly bald patches of the back. But yeah, I quite liked him. And then the other thing, so it's funny, Geno, you mentioned about how some of these films are preserved for reasons of like they've got images of specific places, right? So this has the Vasquez Rocks in it, and the Vasquez Rocks. The first place I ever really was aware of them. Have you ever seen Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure Part 2?
This is likely going to be the only time that you'll ever hear of a connection between a Robert J. Horner Western and a Bill and Ted movie.
Okay, so yeah, so in Bogus Journey, Bill and Ted's 2.
I was wondering there if there was a lost Bill and Ted film I'd not seen, or if you just forgot the title of.
No, Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey
Right.
is the official title. Yeah. So there's a scene where they're watching TV and they're watching William Shatner. I think it's the one where he fights the Gorn captain. It's an old episode of Star Trek, and he runs up, and then the Vasquez Rocks, which are these very specific kind of like slanted set of rocks, and he runs up, and then it fades into then Bill and Ted approaching the same rocks, like they kind of just do a overlap or a fade thing. And so for some reason, when I was watched the movie in the cinema, I was like, oh, that's really cool. Like, they've showed a piece of older footage and then they've shown that this is a real place, right? It's not obviously an alien planet. But anyway, they show up in this movie and they're so iconic that I was like, I know those rocks. And then I was forced to Google why I knew the rocks. And then anyway, interesting to me. I realized to nobody else. But the Vasquez Rocks cool rocks, and they appear in this movie. So for all of you geologists
I don't
out
think you ever sounded more like a like an
Elementary school
elementary school teacher. Cool rocks, kid dudes.
all right. Moving swiftly
No,
along.
that was interesting, actually, to be fair.
But apparently they appear in a ton of old westerns, and
yeah, they're like Bronson Canyon or something like
yeah.
once
I
you
think
yeah.
they're in Los Angeles County, so they're like once you notice them, you'll
Yeah.
see them over and over again.
Unfortunately, Robot Monster never set up his bubble machine in front of them, so they're not quite as famous as Bronson Canyon. But yeah, so I think this overall, just as a viewing experience, I think this is the film I probably enjoyed the most out of the three. And I don't know if that's a coincidence, because it might be one of the better preserved ones, or if that was just coincidental. It kind of clipped along, and it had a fairly involved story, you know. And like I said, Kit Carson I quite liked from the moment he came on screen. So yeah, no, this is I mean, I still don't know if it's gateway material, but of the three, this is probably the one that's a little bit more audience friendly if you wanted to dip your toe into the and
Silent Bees.
this, I think this will come across maybe when we round up as well. This will come up again, but it is worth noting that it, whereas the talkies of Bob Horner that we watched before, and I don't know if they were exceptional or not, you know, their deficiencies were much more noticeable, even if you're not a connoisseur of the B Western, and that is a thing I think that you kind of have to be to differentiate between, really, to fully appreciate. But it was just kind of glaringly, yeah, these are a little bit shoddy. Whereas I think in the case of the Walloping Kid, it could stand up alongside dozens of other silent. You know, it doesn't do itself. It's not shameful while lying down next to others, I would say.
I did have one question about the soundtracking, right? Because it does feel like just a bunch of classical music has been kind of like dumped over the top, and I wondered if that is something that the DVD company has done, or is, I think, did the prints come that way? Because sometimes it means that occasionally you get some very incongruous music. Like there's a few sort of sexually threatening scenes. In fact, all three of these movies have quite like you really see the pre-codeness sometimes of these things, right? Some of the language, even in the intertitles, is like surprising, I think. And then just yeah, like the all three movies have these kind of sketchy male characters who are kind of trying to force women into compromising positions, right? But then like sometimes the music over the top of that's like a kind of like skinny marinky dinky dink, skinny marinky
Yeah,
dink.
it doesn't always line up, right? Yeah,
Huh?
agreed. I suspect that's probably something that's happened along the way, just slightly lazy. As long as there's music running, that's fine, kind of thing. But yeah,
that's
someone
more
could,
or less on the DVD company than it is on the actual film.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think someone needs to take a little bit more care if they're going to put this out, just to at least, so like you said, it isn't playing some very light-hearted thing in the middle of a kind of attempted rape scene, and then very like exciting music when someone's just cooking a sausage or something. Like
Yeah, I think just a little, yeah,
they're a
exactly.
little out of sync. They're a little out of sync.
Yeah.
I think that's just a certain cynicism at a certain point. Like, how many people are actually going to watch this? And as long as it's not quiet, then someone's just left the CD running and they've gone out to get some coffee or something. Or
Yeah, but it's a minor complaint. And this was the only one where it really jumped out at me. The other two, it wasn't as
particularly
obvious.
noticeable in the Walloping Kid. I'm guessing they left an intern in charge or something when they did this one, rather than someone who knew what they were doing. But right, across
the plains. Now it's funny, Clive, because you were saying I thought this one in some ways maybe for me was one of the most interesting, because I wasn't expecting like two women to almost be the core of the film. Like I would like when you say to me Western, and when you say to me, you know, silent Western, I'm not thinking this is a movie going to be about like women's strife.
Well, yeah, no, it's definitely the most unusual in terms of you don't get. I wouldn't have thought. Might be again. Who knows? Maybe if you go looking around, you'll find more of them. But yeah, I wasn't expecting, and it's only 38 minutes, at least 38 minutes extant. I'm not sure if it was originally. I'm guessing it must have been a little bit longer. But rather than the usual, oh, there's a secret band of rustlers on the ranch, or there's some people pretending to be ghosts in the local mine or something. Yeah, it's surprisingly it's about a cat house and a gambling den, right? Like more than anything else.
And it's always a very contemporary story about like a young woman who's kind of like duped. She's offered a job in what she thinks is a legitimate job, and then she gets to the place and it turns out to be like a brothel type of a
Yeah,
situation, right?
and
I mean,
quite
that's
obvious. I think that's quite obviously so, even though you don't see any skin or anything like that. Um, I was quite surprised for a film in 1900 that it's front and center. I mean, it's slightly coded. I mean, there's an awful lot of dancing as opposed to fucking, but it's, you clearly know what this place is for.
Oh yeah, I think there's no question. And the one there's the two kind of lead actors. The one who's the kind of more flappery looking one with the black hair. And she kind of has. I mean, it's hard to see because the print is not great, but it seemed like she had quite a lot of cleavage exposed. I was like, whoa, definitely kind of a Betty Boop kind of a vibe I was getting from her. Um, but yeah, no, I just wasn't expecting a movie that would have like women at its center, I guess. Um,
Is that,
anyway,
do you think, I mean, it's difficult to tell maybe because so few exist. Do you think that is unusual, Gino, or do you think there might be a kind of subgenre of the I guess women's pictures, I suppose, of the B Western, or what do you think?
Well, I think that, special. I mean, of this era, I think it might be a little unusual, but like, especially when like Roy Rogers and Dale Evans teamed up, I think that that's when, women started to play more of a role than just the damsel in distress. Like Dale Evans in a lot of the Roy Rogers films that I've seen, is basically a front and center, part of the story. Like, it's her ranch that's being invaded by cattle rustlers in Roll on Texas Moon. It's, I think, her theater show that they're trying to save in films like, say, Lights of Old Santa Fe. So, she becomes front and center, of the action. And then you know, there was also a singing cowgirl in Dorothy Page, who made about 3 films for Grand National Pictures before they wound up having to shut down. But yeah, and then there were tough women in some of these films. I mean, Peggy Stewart, Linda Sterling certainly, and some others. But yeah, this a film with this kind of a theme is more or less the exception more than it is the rule.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is that it's the combination, because all those people you mentioned, but they were usually the more kind of virginal or traditional heroines. I'm not sure if they often played essentially sex workers, right? Like I think that marks this
Oh
out
yeah, no. I
being
mean,
pretty
Dale Evans
pure.
certainly never.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's almost like I don't know, like Deadwoody, like I could see
Yeah,
like
I
Al.
was
I could
genuinely
almost see
that
like Al
took.
Swearingen or what was it in the yeah I was yeah.
Yeah, no, you're quite right. Even though overall, as a piece of entertainment, I preferred Walloping It. Just in terms of surprises, this definitely was the unusual one that stood out as, oh, and do we have any idea how much of it is missing, if at all? I'm assuming some of it must be missing because there's kind of bits of the narrative that don't make too much sense either. Like how many minutes do you think we might be missing? Do we have any idea?
I would have to harbinger a guess and say that it's or hazard a guess. No, harbinger. Hazard a guess that it's likely probably about a good 10 or so minutes.
Right.
I would assume, because most of these films run like 48 minutes or 60 minutes at a clip. So I would imagine it would be about a good 10 or even 20 minutes that are missing from this rather ghastly print that we had to view. But it was sadly the only known print that I could find. I couldn't find anything else of this film. Like, no other person seems to have it. So, and I'm assuming that the print was so bad because every now and then you get a recreated title card.
Yes.
That's obviously been computer generated instead of the original title card, because I guess the film was so splicey. And I'm going to even hazard a guess and say this is like probably a 5th or 6th generation print, probably even a little more. So this was definitely, of the 3 films, the hardest watch. I mean, is it a film I'd likely watch again? I'd like to see it in a better version.
Yes.
Certainly. But, in this print, I'm not sure. And the main character, Pawnee Bill Jr., he's another one that, Horner said, let's give this guy a name, and put him in pictures, and the guy in question, and it's funny because Horner was actually sued by the real Pawnee Bill, Thomas Lilly, who was an American showman. Horner was actually sued by him for using the Pawnee Bill name. And the guy who plays Pawnee Bill Jr. in this is a guy by the name of Ted Wells, who is probably more famous now for another film that he made with Horner, but in the sound era, called The Phantom Cowboy, where him and comedian Jimmy Aubrey run around in their underwear for about 10 minutes of film.
Me and Nick like to do that on the show now and again.
Just cut loose.
But also not to belabor the point here, because I don't want to give viewers the I mean, just as a viewing experience for modern, and especially the 3 of us are kind of slightly more open-minded and attuned to, maybe, I can imagine putting this in front of someone totally unprepared who just watches modern viewers, they would just what the hell is this, like just, it would just be too distanced in time. So I don't want to big it up too much.
It is nearly 100 years old. I mean, that's
I'm just to finish
looking at these dates and just thinking it's incredible actually to see.
And just to finish the thought, I think one of the problems is, because it is, people do have a problem as well dealing with things below a certain standard, so they don't even deal with them. But if you can imagine it was possible to restore such a thing to a level that people would watch it, like we said, a kind of a film with strong female leads, dealing with essentially prostitution out west in 1928, that would rewrite a lot of people's idea of the history of cinema and what films dealt with, especially American cinema. I think maybe some people might expect that from European cinema, but American genre cinema as well, right? Like, considering that a lot, I would imagine in 1928 some people rocking up to a B Western looking for a good kind of 6-shooting good time may have been taken aback somewhat by Across the Plains, and not the film that they
also
expected.
Worth mentioning that there's quite a grim scene where Ted Wells rides off and he has to escape. I can't remember exactly why, but then he comes across Helen, who's our main character, her dying sister with this baby in her arm, right? And then she's, he gets the baby, and then later on,
it's a bit for the apocalypse, isn't it?
Yes,
yeah,
that's very true. And then, but then later on, there's this really grim part where the sister, where she asks Pawnee Bill, she's like, "What about my sister?" And then there's no title, but you can clearly see his mouth say, "She's dead." That's all he says, and you're like, "Oh, that's wow." He really didn't soften that in any way, shape, or form. I was like,
which would have been, I guess, authentic to the
time.
West, right? Yeah.
Anyway, Yeah, so I said I think this film, in some ways, a difficult print as it is, I thought it was quite interesting just because of.
Well, it also shows up
Okay.
sometimes why it's essential. The more distance in time you get as well from certain films, it is interesting and maybe even essential sometimes to have a time for discussion and reflection, because all so far I think I've enjoyed thinking about these films and talking about them more than the viewing experience was fun, if you see what I mean. So the value comes in the reflection and the thinking about it, and talking to other like-minded people who are interested, rather than a rollicking good time there with your popcorn or whatever, right? So the White
White Outlaw.
Outlaw.
Well, before we move on to our final film, I just wanted to, say that if you're looking for Across the Plains from 1928, again, the print is abysmal. It's like one of the worst prints of anything I've ever seen. But, I got to give it some slack in that it's the only print that I've seen out there. You could find it on this DVD, a Lost Silent Westerns Collection, Cowboy Classics Volume 2, where it's paired up with the Leo Maloney film 100% Nerve from 1926. So you get two films for like about $5. These Alpha DVDs usually go for, and they're quite rare. So, and I'm surprised, Clive, that you didn't pick up on Boris Bullock's name, because I thought that would have his
Well,
character
it
name would
did.
have been right up your alley. Walla Walla Slim.
Yeah, no, it's definitely. I think it's just because the conversation took a turn, so I forgot to go back to it. But no, yes, I mean, yeah, you can certainly see why Kit Carson was adopted, right? It kind of rolls off the tongue and sounds a lot more like a Western hero.
Boris Bullock does sound like a cassock, though, so
Well, I was just referring to the character's name.
Well, yeah,
Walla
Walla Walla
Slim.
Slim's a pretty great name too.
That's great.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. No, there's a lot of good names actually in these films. I think people got lazy with their names in more modern times. I think we need to bring back some of these monikers. Okay, so
White Outlaw.
yes. Right. This is the one I'm blanking slightly on what happened in this one. I just remember it having quite a lot of, more than anything else, a hell of a lot of impressive stunt riding in this one. Like
Is this the one where somebody literally jumps a horse off of like a canyon into a river? One of these three had that scene, and I was just like, whoa.
Yeah. And you want to, okay, this is where I'm going to love talking about this, because this film, to my surprise, when I researched it, was actually remade by Horner in the sound era as The Apache Kids Escape with Jack Perrin. And he actually reuses that shot of Art Accord riding his horse off the cliff into the water. He actually reuses that in The Apache Kids Escape.
Yes, because we talked about it, didn't we? We singled that scene out because it was like a holy shit moment, and I suppose it was a thing as well. It would have been a circus act of the time as well, right? To jump a horse off a diving board into like a barrel of water or something like that. Yeah, that's something people don't do anymore. I'm guessing something to do with, the number of horses that might have to be put down afterwards. But
so this is
an amazing stunt. I mean, just take that, Jackie Chan. Fucking hell.
But this is the one that I quite like. The opening of this I really enjoy, because so you've got like our main character who's the white outlaw, right? And he wears a white mask, and this is, he does robberies and stuff. He comes back to his shack where he has his buddy, and they apparently rob together, right?
Yes.
And but it turns out that his buddy has borrowed the mask and done like a Federal Reserve robbery.
Yes, a Wells Fargo shipment, right?
Yeah. And so he's like, hey, that's not cool. Don't do that. And then he gets this letter from the reverend in his hometown that basically says, your mom's not very well, and you know, we all kind of know that the money you sent to her is stolen and that you're kind of a piece of crap. So, you know, could you at least come home and say hello to your mom? And then, Gino, I'll let you explain what his buddy says to him in response. This is like an amazing title card. If you can remember what the words are exactly.
He says something to the effect of, "It's no use worrying over your old woman. If she was any good, she would have never had a worthless son like you."
Yeah. It's a sick burn for like
Yeah.
1920 or whatever. I was like, ooh. And
Yeah.
then it immediately comes to
I was
fisticuffs
waiting for
right
him
away.
to do like a yo mama joke or something. But it's funny as well, that whole exchange, like it's quite funny, the kind of no honor among thieves, like because like he comes in and he's like, dude, you totally pulled off a federal robbery, disguises me. And the other guy doesn't like, he doesn't pretend like he didn't. He just is like,
Yeah.
well, I'm gonna do it if I'm gonna get away with it. It's like it's very much kind of shucks, I got caught kind of thing rather than any kind of apology. Or yeah, so that is kind of quite funny.
And
It's
so
nice setup.
then
He knows, yeah.
he has to scarp her then, and he ends up working for like for some ranch. He kind of goes straight, right? He works for some ranch where it turns out that the colonel who owns it's gonna have to foreclose because he's been taken by a clip joint. You get another again, these kind of it's interesting that these have this whole um gambling, trouble, brothely kind of stuff going on, right?
Yeah. I just want to mention very quickly as well, and then I'll open up because I only got 3 minutes here. I'm gonna have to wrap up, unfortunately. The one thing I just wanted to say really quickly, just because it does have that awesome show off kind of stunt, um, I don't want that to detract from just the overall high level of stunt work and riding around and stuff. I mean, we talked about this before, in general, in the B westerns, it's something that gets overlooked. But particularly in this film, there's an awful lot of like, things like people, and I was even accounting for any kind of Dutch angling as well. But even if you take that into account, like people,
Yeah.
like taking really
Writing
sharp
down like
trails, yeah, and information, and you're thinking, Jesus Christ, like who has those skills in Hollywood today, right? It really is
Well, that you
massively
could
impressive.
you could chalk that up to the great Art Accord, who is this guy right here. This is the DVD that I transferred, the White Outlaw, and the film is paired with another film, a Rin Tin Tin knockoff featuring Klondike the Wonder Dog called The Law's Lash from 1929. And Art Accord, very interesting story. He was a rodeo champion, and he was one of the few cowboys who had ridden the acclaimed Bucking Horse Steamboat, who later inspired the horse logo on the Wyoming license plate. And he was involved in steer wrestling. He was involved in roundups, and he won world champion titles, even beating Hoot Gibson in 1916.
Wow.
So he was a powerful cowboy, and he became friends with a lot of the cowboys in Hollywood. And that's how he got to Hollywood, and he made some films for Universal. Blue Streak Westerns was, I believe, the series title. And if you're interested in seeing more of his films, I have a few more of his films. Sadly, not a lot of his films survive, actually. And this film, The White Outlaw, is actually from his later period when he was relegated to working with guys like Horner and the lower budgeted and filmmakers like Horner and Horace B. Carpenter and the like. He wound up committing suicide in 1931 by taking cyanide, and it was rather tragic. But he was one of the great screen cowboys and was well remembered in the silent era.
So there we go, a cheerful way to end. So in summation, I mean, well, thank you, Gino, for hosting and also for sharing the films. And I could talk for a lot longer. Unfortunately, it's one of those days where I have to get going and have other things to do. But I think we should do this again. I think there's a bit more to milk from this era. So yes, Gino, please come back. go away, think about some more things we might want to talk about, and come back.
When you said Geno come back, I thought you were going to finish that by saying you could blame it all on me.
No, it's true, and for me especially, I think more than either of you, and more than Clive, certainly, this is all new. Like, this is absolutely all new territory for me. I know silent in general. I've only really dipped my toes in, and then certainly like silent B films are. It's all new. So yeah, having somebody who's a bit more knowledgeable and having somebody who can kind of curate and present a few things with some context is really it's awesome. So
go west, young man.
no, I've already been out there, to be honest. I lived out there for quite a while. I'm quite happy to be back in the east now.
Okay then.
Underfoot, Nick.
Until next time, where Geno is welcome back anytime. And go watch Six Gun Theatre, and you can learn even more. So until then, cheerio.